Hi, everybody. My name's Chase. I work with Alation. I manage partnerships in kind of the western portion of North America and Asia Pacific. I'm here with my colleague, Steve Berger. Steve, would you like to say hi? Excellent.
Hello, good afternoon.
Great. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And if Steve, you could kind of give me a heads up and you could see it, or just a thumbs up, that'd be great.
It's there. We can see it.
Excellent. Love it. Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining. We're super excited to be here. I know some of you have probably been on a couple of sessions today, so if you want to use this chance to stretch it out or stand up, I won't be offended. I can start with a little bit about the company. Alation pioneered this data catalog market, and we released our first product in 2015. And since then, we've grown quite a bit. We're at a point now where we have just over 300 employees, about the same amount of customers. We're consistently recognized by Gartner, as Julie mentioned, Forrester, the Dresners of the world. And we really do have a global, diversified customer base. One customer that I'll point out from this list is GE Aviation. And I like their story because their users refer to Alation as the Google for the data lake. They have over 200,000 tables that are fully searchable, that they've ingested into the Alation data catalog. They've truly unlocked the power of subject matter experts in their business, and democratized valuable data to over 2,500 users enterprise-wide. So as we kind of go in, we could talk more about the product. I like to start by just establishing some common language. This term data catalog is used pretty broadly, and to make sure we're kind of on the same page here. A catalog's just, it's a repository of metadata, right? It allows you to do things like search for, find data, build a data governance practice around your data, and collaborate and build analysis. Historically, we called these metadata management tools. And the data catalog is really the version 2 of that. I like to think about it as sort of a Rolodex versus LinkedIn, right? We used to have these Rolodexes, which were these static things that kind of sat on your desk. And LinkedIn is this living, breathing directory that contains, everything you would want to know about your professional network and updates every second. So that's what I would compare today's version of a data catalog to. So a modern data catalog will contain things like your data sets, right? Your tables, your reports, your queries, from not only your cloud systems, but it really should include the information from your legacy sources as well. You have your common functionality like your glossaries, your lineage, your pages that are all incorporated into it. And ultimately, it should help you answer these questions. So how do I find information? Can I use the information that I've found? Should I use that information? And the ultimate goal is to create a front door for your data environment and a single source of truth. So Alation's vision, we talk a lot about this, is to empower a curious and rational world. And it sounds very aspirational, but the truth is, if people have ideas, they're going to come to a conclusion around those ideas. And we'd like people to come to conclusions by using curiosity and thinking scientifically. And we think that the way we do that is by helping organizations establish the data culture, right? And to build a data culture, you need intelligence around data. And we see intelligence around data as 3 pillars, right? So first you have data search and discovery, right? This one's pretty simple. If you can't find the data, you can't use it. Just like, if I don't know where a restaurant's located, I can't go eat there. And then the next piece is data literacy. As Mike mentioned, right? Once you've found the data, how do you use it? What are other people doing with it? Where does the data come from? And what are the right and wrong uses for that data? And then the third pillar of data intelligence is really data governance. And it feeds the other 2 ideas, because you need to make sure that the responsibility and authority around that data are correct if you're going to put it in front of your business users. So data culture's been important, but never more so than it is today. And why is that? Well, on one hand, we have this explosion of data, right? There's a lot of data, a variety of data. It's coming from a million different places. Data is supposed to be an asset, but it sure doesn't feel like that sometimes. And then we have this changing workforce, right? The people working with the data is constantly changing. People are coming and going out of an organization. Subject matter experts leave sometimes, creating a tribal knowledge problem. And then how people are working with the data is changing quite rapidly, right? In the world where there's no longer a water cooler, and you can no longer tap your neighbor on the shoulder and say, hey, Jenny, what am I supposed to do with this table? What do I use this for? Collaboration has never been more key than it is today. And then in the back text of all this, right, we have these, ever-changing laws and regulations that your organizations are required to keep up with. So data culture never been more important than it is today. And that sort of brings us to kind of, what our customers use Alation for? Well, ultimately, right, a data catalog is an enterprise homepage for all of your data assets. But what we found is we have customers use us for all sorts of different use cases. We sort of see them in these clusters. So I like to share this to give an idea of sort of the sense of maturity and variety around the customers that we work with. So a couple that I'll highlight here, American Family Insurance, in their own words, moved from a culture of reporting to a culture of analysis. They use Alation as a framework for their data governance process, but also to provide analysts with the tools and data that they need to answer basic questions, perform analysis around data that drives the next business action. Cloud migrations is a big area for us as well. And Travelers Insurance needed to prioritize their migration of data assets to their new cloud environment. And they turned to Alation's data catalog to determine the best migration path based on insights around popularity, user behavior, and usage of data. So Teresa Peachy, their VP of data management, calls Alation their one-stop shop for information about data assets that helps us prioritize our movement to the cloud. So as we go into the product, we can talk about some of the tools that will help you along these processes. And with that, I will pass it off to Steve Berger to take us through a product demonstration. Steve, let me stop sharing my screen and pass it off to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chase. Let me. All right. And if you'll do the same for me, Chase, if you're able to see my screen, give me the
I can
thumbs
see
up
it.
there. Excellent. So first things first, we love our analogies and metaphors at Alation. So you'll hear me extend on some of the analogies that Chase may have used, but this is Alation. It's the data catalog. And, we use catalogs, electronic and otherwise, in our day-to-day life. So if you think of something like shopping on Amazon, it's a digital form of a catalog. Take, for example, the Sears Roebuck catalog from years past, right? You can search through and find everything you may need. Now, there's a kind of a universal search bar, Google-like experience, where you can drop in a concept, and we'll come back to this concept in our hypothetical scenario in a second. But before I go into story mode, just do a quick overview of the landing page, right? We can organize and customize the entry point to the catalog so that the users of the catalog can quickly and easily be directed to the resources that they're most likely to use or most in need of, including things like gamification of catalog usage itself. Who are the people contributing the most to it, getting the most out of it, etc. That's something we tend to kind of go through quickly. And I like to stop and go through a little more thoroughly with new audiences and folks that may have not seen Alation before. Much of this content can be curated around organizational units or other segments. And then there's a section tailored specifically to me as the user. Assets that I'm watching, things that I've recently visited, and things I've favorited or starred. So how do we use this kind of in a real world scenario? Well, let's pretend I'm an analyst, maybe a new analyst at an organization, and I have a conversation with a stakeholder. Maybe I'm a streaming service like Hulu, and this stakeholder is a vice president of programming. And the conversation centers around, new program development. Who's watching our programs? What audiences do we want to appeal to? We've had some big hits with kind of dragons and swords, and we've had some big hits with mysteries and science fiction. And maybe we, want to look at targeting a specific audience like 20 somethings or tweens or whatever the case may be. Now, as a new analyst in the organization, I may not have a full perspective of the data landscape. And honestly, if you're like me and you've worked as an analyst, you may be a senior analyst in a large organization and not have a full view of the data landscape. So the catalog can be thought of somewhat analogous to like a card catalog in a library, right? Presents you the metadata information and allows you to find the right resource for the task you need. Now, here's the thing from my real life kind of demo scenario. Let's say I'm having that conversation with a stakeholder and she says, there's been reporting in the past on customer segmentation model. I've seen it in meetings, but I really don't know where it is or where it came from. But that's a clue, to start your work. So entering the data catalog, I can simply do a conceptual search like customer segment. Now, I can look across all my data domains or specify it to one in particular. I'll leave it across all data domains. And when I cast my net, initially I'm casting a wide net, meaning I get all kinds of assets returned to me. Cataloged queries that have been discovered in source systems, the physical assets themselves like tables and columns and schemas. I could get results from conversations that occurred within in the catalog or users. Now, I know in my conversation with the stakeholder, she said she's seen a report before. So maybe I want to look and see what existing customer segment BI reports exist, because I want to be efficient and effective in my work and not reinvent the wheel if I can avoid it. So I'll narrow my search down to dashboards. Now, the genesis of Alation was heavily based in analyst productivity and data literacy, but we've evolved to kind of put our arms around governance, right? So traditional governance is very compliance driven, but the reality of the world and data democratized, data literate organization is you want more of this inline or agile governance or non-invasive governance, to borrow from a popular book on the subject. And what that means is, rather than kind of a punitive, drawbridge at the moat type of governance, it's the belief that in a modern data literate organization, the actors, the analysts and users and consumers of the data are well-intended, and they just need very subtle direction into proper usage. Not unlike highway signs, right? Given the volume of vehicles that are on the roads, it's actually kind of amazing, even before the advent of smart cars, that we don't have more accidents, right? And that's because everybody gets in their car. They basically intend to do well, and they use highway signs as directions to how to behave in traffic. So with that, I see a BI report with a clear red stop sign that says deprecation. That's a visual indicator to me. Don't use this. I don't need a lot of elaboration on, why it's not fit for use. I'm just quickly made aware that it's not. Conversely, I see one with endorsement, a green check mark. Now, to be honest, I'm a very curious person, probably to a point of problematic for myself. So I want to understand more first why I can't use this report. So if I click into it, I see that it's a BI report. I can see the breadcrumb trail indicating it came from a Tableau server. And again, I can drill into this red, yellow, green. So a steward has provided me a very clear explanation that I shouldn't use this report because it's based on an old customer segmentation model. Fair enough. And it even points me back to that appropriate BI report that I should ultimately use. So it's that guiding hand of governance, that very subtle direction to correct use. Now, interestingly, I'm also given a warning. So something with less severity than deprecation. And it says, there's another problem that may or may not affect the fit for use aspect of this report. So I can investigate this visually through interrogating the lineage that's auto-created when this BI system is ingested into Alation. Think of this as like your Google Maps or your Waze getting you to a destination. So here we have our BI report and its associated deprecation. And again, we can see the page for that report that we just visited. But here's the Upstream BI data source. So it in and of itself doesn't have a deprecation, but it has a warning saying there's yet another deprecation you need to be aware of. And that's this table from our data warehouse. So kind of from stem to stern, this thing's just really not fit for use. We really shouldn't be using this data. So that's scared me sufficiently off the track on this one. So I'm going to go visit the one that's been endorsed. Now we do see a yellow warning, but this is in a totally different nature, right? Whereas before the warning was kind of indicating problems with the data, this is more of a reinforcement of correct usage. I have a BI report that's topical. Looking at an example of it, it looks like it's the right segmentation model. It's got my tweens and young adults, but it's subject to a PII data policy. Again, in my hypothetical scenario here, maybe I'm new to the company. I haven't actually yet been to the PII training and certification program. So I can click on that link. It'll take me to the glossary segment of Alation, where I can read and review that written policy. And in kind of real time in my analysis workflow, be guided appropriately to take right action with this. In other words, I can't claim ignorance for misuse, because right within the warning of the BI report, I'm taken to the policy. Furthermore, I can investigate other embedded documentations around this BI report, like the KPI definitions that we may be using as our standards for our organization. But net, it shows me that there's an existing report that seems to satisfy the need for my audience without me having to create a new set of analysis. So I can then direct my stakeholder to this Tableau report, and he or she can investigate it and see if it answers the questions they have. Now, a couple of things. One, in my own real life experience as an analyst, invariably what happens is when I arrive at this point, I give it back to my stakeholder. If it's good, they find 5 permutations of the question they originally asked that they want to see variations on, right? So you have to kind of go back and tweak it, build it. The other is that there may be associated processes or workflows around this BI report that are set to make it approved or validated for use for things like containing PII. So earlier we saw the notification that it's subject to the PII policy. Here we see fields that can reflect its status in a PII approval workflow. It's been approved. A steward is marked yes, it does contain PII, and they can go through and organize it in other ways. So kind of flashback to our real life scenario. My stakeholder says, this is a great report, but now I want to see these bars broken out by 4 geographic regions or something like that, some permutation of the analysis. So that indicates to me I do need to crack open Tableau and build a new BI report, or take this one and expand on it. And this is a chapter out of my own real life experience. I worked for Tableau for 6 years prior to Alation. And that was an actual kind of real life scenario. Here's a report. We want a permutation on that. Go figure it out. So you kind of use the lineage view to reverse engineer, right? I see the BI report. I see its associated BI data source. And here are 3 tables. Let's say they come from a data warehouse. So this one is a, let's see, let me go down the screen here. Let's pretend that one's a fact table from an on-premise data warehouse, and the other 2 might be dimensional tables. So as an analyst, I might be curious to investigate that table further. Again, we see the associated warnings, deprecations, but there's more interesting information being surfaced to me. Who's using this table? Now, kind of long story short, initially, this is based on an examination of the query history of this table in its source system. But then later, as the catalog is used and matured, its calculation is also offset by catalog search and usage. So these are a combination of people who write queries against this database or data source or table, but also those who search for it frequently or steward roles in the catalog. Which, by the way, if you're enabling an agile data governance methodology or non-invasive, then you can examine those top users and say, well, who would be good to promote to as stewards? Well, those people that use it most frequently and know the most about the data. Now, if you have more of a traditional compliance requirement for stewardship or governance, you can assign individuals and groups. So if your governance team has to go through HIPAA or FERPA compliance training, nothing changes. Or you can consider a mix. So governance by those who are in charge of the compliance aspects and governance by those who are frequent users and knowledgeable of the data itself, kind of breaking down those silos. But the really interesting part where this starts to happen is not only do we see the users, but we see what they're doing. We see a catalog history of queries that they've issued against. And those queries themselves become assets in the catalog that can be warned, endorsed, deprecated, used, and reused. In fact, we can go all the way through to our own SQL IDE tool so that we don't lose our workflow. And unlike other SQL IDE tools, those red, yellow, green warnings, deprecations, and indications are carried all the way through so that information is surfaced. Let's say I know a lot about this asset, so I don't have to rely on the catalog to give me information about it. I just want to get in and start writing queries against it. Well, maybe a new policy was enacted last night that I wasn't aware of. Kind of like there's a highway I drive pretty regularly, so I know how to drive that highway safely. But if a road construction project starts overnight, I'm going to observe a new speed limit sign based on the new conditions. So same goes here. Other really interesting things that happen with the data assets as a product of that same, what we call query log ingestion, the queries, but also their associated joins and filters are cataloged so that any users in the future can be guided to use the appropriate joins and filters. So say, for example, you're onboarding junior or new analysts, and you want to make sure that they're out of the gate writing highly optimized queries. Maybe the system they're writing against is a paper compute model. Well, then the stewards or governance folks can indicate that, hey, you should really use this join in the query to make it sure that it's optimized. But this query log ingestion process does a lot more interesting things as well, like popularity. Going from a table view, we can see what are the most frequently queried columns. And, if you're familiar with Pareto principle, you see that, the top 20% are used by 80% of your audience. And then you have a long tail of infrequently or never used assets. Now, at a schema level, that can be an interesting proposition for examining cloud data migrations. I mentioned this hypothetical data warehouse is on-premise. Maybe I'm looking at migrating it to Snowflake, but I don't know what to start migrating first. Well, very first pass examination would tell me, why not migrate those that are being used most frequently and be less concerned about tables and assets that aren't used, later on down the path. So I get a sense of what's being used. I get a sense of examples and what's reusable from that. And then something that you've already seen that's a product of the same query log ingestion, which is this lineage, or sometimes referred to as data provenance, because there are other lineage tools on the market. And there's actually a differentiation between the audience and technical aspects of a lineage tool. There are technologist lineage tools. Think of those as like the Rand McNally Atlas, right? It shows you all possible routes in a given state. So all roads in New Mexico I could take on a road trip. But our lineage or provenance view is those directly associated with assets ingested into the catalog and how they affect upstream and downstream elements, which makes it really interesting if I'm examining this asset and I want to see the impact analysis of all.
Do we lose Steve?
Did we lose some sound?
Oh, hello.
There you are.
Steve, we lost your first second. You might want to back up about 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm now getting the message. My internet connection's unstable. My apologies. So backing up 10 seconds. We're reviewing an asset that's a table in a data warehouse. Maybe it's a fact table. With an easy one-click button, I can see all downstream assets that are potentially a part of our impact analysis, other tables and BI reports. So one-click impact analysis. If we go back to my earlier example about cloud migration, it might be important. Or if we have to deprecate an element in this, we need to know what downstream BI reports. Conversely, if I go to, let's find a table that's populated from other sources, we can look at the upstream audit for consideration and understand what's feeding that. So here's an example of a table that has upstream elements. So I can look at the report that generates my upstream audit. Now, what use could this potential use could this have? Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, cloud data migrations. If I'm looking at migrating this table to Snowflake and it's a popular, frequently used table, that's fine. But maybe there's an infrequently or unused table that's actually a staging table. I might miss that just using popularity, but if I use the upstream audit capability, I get a much more holistic view of what's ultimately feeding the information or data into this table. Those are a couple of new features that we've just added to Alation that we're very excited about, that one button impact and audit capability. So that covers a lot of just general usage with an analyst perspective. I'm going to pause for a second and say, Chase, how am I doing on time?
Steve, you're doing great on time.
Okay. Any
so I'd
burning
say-
questions that have come up that I should stop and address now?
We got a couple queued up if you want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll take those and then kind of continue on a little bit more with the remainder of the demo.
So Lisa asked about your governance capabilities, and right after she asked that, you did hit on them. Lisa, if you could respond in chat, did we cover that question? And while that's in the meantime, Shane had a couple questions. First is, can we see the lineage even across disparate source data sets in databases?
Across disparate sources and data sets. So the answer is yes, provided that all assets are either, so for auto lineage, yes, provided that all assets are in the catalog. So in other words, this BI report may be ultimately a product of a data warehouse table that's fed from various streams.
Mm-hmm.
If we want that to be auto discovered, auto displayed in lineage, those assets all have to be ingested into the catalog and feeding in. They've all got to have that commonality of ultimately feeding into the perspective we're looking at, like this table. If they're not in the catalog or some element that's not necessarily supported by Alation out of the box as an auto discovered, we have a very robust REST API for lineage, so you could add to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then,
sorry, go ahead. Was there another question?
yeah, Shane had a second question. He's curious how advanced the query and filter matching is. For example, whether an alias to a table or a column is being used or not, or the ability to detect differences in case or quotes.
Oh, great question. And that's kind of a segue into some of the AI and machine learning built into Alation. I will try to cover this very quickly. It sounds like some of these questions are feeding themselves into probably deeper dive demos we should do in the future. But the question around matching to aliases and other column names. So you notice up here, and I've done a disservice not talking about this before now, but when this asset was ingested, when we did the initial crawl of this data source in my SQL database, the table name, the asset technical name was sum underscore top DRG. Now, for searching and matching purposes, that's not a very good descriptor. If you've ever worked with an SAP schema, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. If you want to just find a revenue table, you can't just search for revenue table. Well, with Alation, you can through a functionality called lexicon. This is our mascot. She's Allie, our Alation robot. And what she does is uses our machine learning and AI to do a form of pattern matching. So she's seen similar patterns like this be ingested before, and they've been associated with the term like sum top DRG or summary top diagnostic related group. She'll make suggestions and make those associations. Or if there's an article in our glossary functionality that may have related asset terms that she's encountered, let's see if I can get lucky with my first blind shot at one, like our gender and salary policy, right? Is, well, this one may not be a good example. I may have to give you a more advanced demo of that later, and that would tie into governance. But basically, when enabled, that machine learning and AI will parse through and look for those alternate labelings, and those can be suggested terms. This is what I'm looking for here. So for example, it's coming across the term type, it sees potential abbreviations across 2,400 objects, and it can direct me as to whether or not, for example, I want to add them to the glossary. So anyway, that's a kind of a long-winded answer to the question, which is yes, potentially if they're in the catalog and discoverable, there's a very good chance Alation can make the association.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Mhm.
That's all we have for right now.
Okay, so I'll keep rolling.
Steve, you cut out a bit there. Steve, are you still on?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep, got you back now. Yeah,
Okay.
it sounds like there's some interest in the chat about how we approach data governance and the different functionality within the catalog. You touched on a couple of things like trust flags, but it sounds like if you could go a little further into that, maybe talk about stewardship dashboards a little bit. I think that might be beneficial to the audience.
Excellent. Yeah, and it's a very deep subject, so I'm not going to do it a lot of justice, but we provide the platform. Now, how you implement governance is going to be, each organization is unique, right? But what we enable, as I alluded to earlier, is that kind of visible or transparent governance, like who should be our data stewards? Well, could be your top users, the people that use the data a lot and are auto-discovered because they're most knowledgeable. So once you start that process, you can enable these stewards to take ownership in the catalog. So an example would be,
We lost you again a little bit.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's like an AT&T commercial.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of to summarize, we enable a lot of simple tools that allow you to jump into a very agile governance motion quickly and easily. So for example, this dashboard shows data objects that don't currently have stewards assigned and therefore by extension don't have governance activities focused on them yet, like curation, like flagging, changing fields to indicate it contains PII, etc. We want to know what we don't know, known unknowns and unknown unknowns. So for example, I can see that, we've assigned 4,000 tables with stewards. So we have a very mature stewardship model. We still have 235 without. Now, many of those might be orphaned or unused, therefore not really requiring stewardship. But I see 2 tables here that are used with some frequency, have very low curation, which indicates aren't very good.
Steve, we lost you again,
Okay.
but I can hear you now. I think you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Right. I think we're so
Take
late.
your
to
video
put
off, Steve. Take your video off. That might help a little bit.
Excellent. Great choice. Stop video. Okay. How's that?
Great.
Much
Still hear
better.
me? Okay. So from this dashboard, we can quickly and easily determine assets that don't currently have stewardship assignments and therefore governance actions being undertaken. We can understand that they're in use or not really in use, and we can take immediate action such as the assignment of data stewards, or we can go to the table and begin examining them to understand things like usage. So governance can be kind of crafted to reflect your governance workflow through the addition of custom fields. So maybe there's a PII policy review process. I can set it in progress. I can send a message to Chase. Okay. Please review for PII, and I can name the asset and give them a link directly to it, whatever it is, some top DRG or whatever the table may be. And then that conversation actually now becomes a part of Chase's governance actions. If he were to go to his stewardship dashboard, he'd see that request come in his inbox. And then as he took action, it would be surfaced under, it would be surfaced under his catalog activity report. So he's gone in and taken some governance action by making changes or curation updates to the physical metadata associated with that asset. In addition to kind of these customizable tools to reflect your own governance workflow, we have, through our services organization, governance accelerators. So if you don't already have thought out what the governance process in your organization should look like, we can come in and help guide you through that and then rapidly deploy those resources within the catalog itself. If you're curious and going into a deep
Steve, you cut out, but I think I can jump in here quickly. And so the governance accelerators Steve's talking about are something that the Great Data Minds team are experts on and can actually help you deliver within your organization.
Excellent.
And it follows a lean and agile mindset approach.
Exactly. I don't know if I can be heard, but that's exactly right. Yeah, lean and agile, very prescriptive. Like if you're familiar with non-invasive data governance, the book, definitely lends itself to that perspective. Chase, is this a good transition point to kind of bring it a summary, or should I go ahead and address more questions? Looks like
I think if you want to summarize things, that would be great. We have another question that just came in, but we can kind of tackle those after we bring it all together.
Okay, well, let me take this question because that'll help bring that together, I think. So
Okay.
The question is, do we support semi-structured and unstructured?
Steve, we lost you again. Let's see. So the question is, with the large AI component that comes with Alation, does the solution support semi-structured and unstructured data?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me or not.
We've got you now.
The answer is yes. We support file systems, API resources, and beyond what we can do automatically through the UI, we have a very robust set of REST APIs for ingesting other sources. So if you can describe anything with a little bit of structure in XML or JSON, you can make it a catalog source if we don't already have an automatic connector for it. I hope that addresses that. So I think to kind of put a bow on it, what makes Alation different and what brings greater value to the organization is that it's a tool that can be used not just by data technologists, i.e. data engineers, data scientists, which they can find great value in the catalog, but it's also a tool that can be used more broadly by organizational analysts, BI report like digital catalogs we use in our everyday lives, like Amazon or LinkedIn. And it catalogs not just the technical data, technical assets, and technical metadata, but things like BI reports. In the glossaries section, the information and documentation can be contained that aren't just like business glossaries and policies, but also like onboarding procedures and documentation. So it really is a pretty powerful, comprehensive tool. As far as a tool for governance, it's very customizable and reflective of your approach to governance. And for that, I would love to do a deeper dive demo for you at a later time. I hope
that's
got
great.
through about that.
Yeah, I think we caught most of it. I think the only other things I'll add on to that is that while we're kind of talking about differentiators and what makes Alation unique is ingesting assets really easily. We have over 70 native connectors with Alation, and we put just as much effort into building new connectors as we do into the rest of the product. So it's top of mind for us. Our goal is to create a catalog that you can connect to anything in your data environment, pull data in from all the sources you would like, and have one asset, one home page for anything that you need to perform analysis.